Hey, shalom and good evening, everybody, and Hag Sameach l'Chag Shavuot. Happy Pentecost. So, friends, we are going to go on a journey, just like the children of Israel have been on this journey from the Exodus from Egypt, Passover, all the way through to being at Mount Sinai, to the Feast of Weeks of Shavuot. We're going to go on a journey with them, and along the way we're going to discuss things like tradition, what's in the Bible, a little bit looking at the book that is the Megillah, the scroll that's actually read at this time, the book of Ruth, and see if we can not only just find ourselves in the story, but make a little bit of maybe some sense of our calling to be a part of, to be grafted into the Jewish roots, to be grafted in with the people of Israel and find ourselves at Mount Sinai this holiday season. So here we are in the festival of Shavuot, or Pentecost. And for the Christian church, we've also been celebrating what we would call Eastertide, which is a 50-day festival from Passover to Pentecost. And of course, we get that from the Jewish calendar. And the festival itself, when we actually read it in the Bible, its literal scriptural references are they're not vague, they're blank. That is, they give very little information about what you're supposed to do, if anything. And so it's because of the lack of clarity that you find in the biblical text. Most of what we do today for the celebration of Shavuot is pure tradition. So if you're an opponent of tradition, boy, you're not going to like this festival. If you're a lover of tradition and you want to know where it all came from, then you're really going to like this festival. So what do we have? We have in the scripture the first reference to the Festival of Weeks you find in Exodus 34. And it's Exodus 34, verse 22. And it says, and I'm reading in English, in a New King James Version, but it doesn't really matter what version of the Bible you're reading because you're going to be translating it from Hebrew. It's not always easy to translate. So it says, "You shall observe the Feast of Weeks, of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end." Okay, so it says in Hebrew, the Chag Shavuot, which is what we're celebrating, Pentecost, Chag Shavuot. That's what it's called from the word Shavua, week. So Shavuot, weeks, the Feast of Weeks. Celebrate Chag Shavuot Ta'aseh lach, do to you. I mean, we translate it as observe. Yeah, fair enough. But do the Feast of Weeks. Do Shavuot. That's all it says. How? What? Do what? Where? When? For how long? What exactly do we include in the doing? The text, as you can see, is incredibly blank. And so you're going to need some more parts of the Bible to really get involved into what we think we're actually supposed to do. And we get this idea that there are 50 days from Passover to Pentecost. Where do we pick up this 50 days? It comes from a blend, actually, of tradition. Now, the tradition of Shavuot is that this is when the people of Israel arrive at Mount Sinai, and God speaks to them for the very first time, and they're going to receive the Torah, Matan Torah, as they say in Hebrew, the giving of the law. Now, for some people, the idea of law is really, really scary, and they hate the idea that you would actually receive anything as obtrusive and controlling of your life as a law. However, as most of you who are gathered tonight to celebrate, we don't find the teaching and the guidance and the instruction of God to be anything other than life-giving, stable, what an incredible foundation for us to sit on, pushes us towards a hope for Messiah, all of these things. So it's actually quite a nice celebration, nice festival to think of. But with this one verse in Exodus that just says, do the Feast of Weeks, and it's so not clear what it is we're actually celebrating, other than it's a wheat harvest. And if that's all we're doing, just celebrating the fact that grains grow, which is lovely, then, doesn't seem like a lot of fun, really. But instead, what we have is we're going to look at two passages. We're going to look at Exodus 19 and we're going to look at Leviticus 23. When we go into Leviticus 23, we happen to see the list of all the different festivals, or the calendar that's given to us by God, beginning with the Sabbath. But in Leviticus 23, verse 15, you get a bit more information about this thing called the Feast of Weeks. And it says, and you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf, or the Omer, of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths, so 7 weeks. And then count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. So you get 7 7s, 49. So you count 49 Omers, 49 sheaves. And then you'll offer a grain offering, another sheaf, a mincha is what you'll be offering. And then you'll bring 2 loaves of bread. Shtei chalot, and they'll be offered. These are the first fruits. Not much more there information either. Certainly nothing to do with the giving of the law or any of those kinds of things. All of that is tradition. But we do get a number. We get the number 49, and this is why we end up in Greek calling this festival Pentecost, which, by the way, is the Jewish name given to this festival in the Septuagint. This is not a Christian name. Okay? The Christians did not come up with the idea of Pentecost, and that replaces Shavuot. It's not true. It's the Greek Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible by Jewish people 2 centuries prior to Jesus. They got the word 50, and here it's a counting, isn't it? You count an Omer, which is a collection of stalks of wheat, which you would then sort of wave in some description, some fashion before the Lord, giving thanks for the fact that food has been provided. It is a gift. At any time you receive a gift from God, you give thanks, etc., etc. But every single day you would count. When do you count? Well, the text says the day after the Sabbath. Okay. Now, I know that seems clear, count from the day after the Sabbath, but which Sabbath? So if Passover falls on a Monday, do you start counting like 5 days later, 6 days later? Is that when you count? Or does the Passover fall on a Sabbath and therefore the very next day you start counting? Which is the tradition. Now, the Qumran community, so the 14th of Nisan is when you start Passover. 50 days from the 14th of Nisan is the 6th of Sivan, which is when you actually celebrate Shavuot today. That is the classic Jewish calendar that we're functioning on today. But at the time of Jesus, there are a couple of other calendars floating around. And one of them was the Qumran community, the Dead Sea sect. They celebrated they decided that the Sabbath after Passover really was nearly a week later. So their Pentecost fell on the 15th of Sivan, which was always a Sunday. So for the Qumran community, they were obsessed with their marking of time. So the people in the desert were celebrating Pentecost a full 9 days later than everybody else, Okay, that's what they were calling the Feast of Weeks, because they started their 49-day count from the Sabbath after the Pentecost, which was their reading of the scripture. All very confusing and all very traditional. However, let's just get as simple as we possibly can. Friends, we're celebrating Pentecost, we're celebrating holy time. We're involved in the rhythm and the cycle that God gives us, that is put inside the universe, that he gave us at creation. And what we make of it as a society and as a community, what we make of it as Christians and as Jews, is as much as we want to put into it. Do Pentecost is what Exodus 34 tells us. And so there is this idea of gathering for 49 days, 50 days, and then something special happens. So there's as you count an Omer. And in the modern day, the way you count an Omer is you actually have an app. You can get yourself an app, and every evening when the sun goes down, you log into your app and press a button. And then you actually pray a prayer. And the prayer is very simple. The prayers, most Jewish prayers are actually quite short and simple. Remember that in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus tells us to keep our prayers short. Now, where does he get this idea from? He gets it from his culture, his community. And the prayer for counting an Omer, a sheaf of wheat, is this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvatav, v'tzivenu al sapirat haomer. Which is, blessed are you, the Lord our God, King of the universe. You have sanctified us with your commandments, and you've commanded us in the counting of an Omer. Simple as that. Then press your little app button, it ticks over, and when you get to 49, you know the next day it's going to be Pentecost. And so there is, as you do this and say these prayers, there's a sense of anticipation and expectation. And we're looking forward to something. We're on a journey. What's going to happen when we get to the other side? And that's what we're going to hopefully have a little look at. And so this idea of going on a journey and expecting and having 50 days appears in Exodus 19. So when you take a look at Exodus 19, where got ourselves out. The Lord, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, has reached down into Egypt and taken out of Egypt a people for himself. He's taken them through the Red Sea. He's fought the battle of Amalek with them. He has done the water from the rock. We've had quail, we've had manna. The clothing is not wearing out. Where's the pillar of cloud and fire? Where's the presence of God that's with us? And we're being taken towards Mount Sinai. This is because redemption, which is the festival of Passover, always leads to revelation, which is what occurs at Mount Sinai. God is going to reveal himself to his people for essentially the very first time. God has appeared to Noah and Adam and Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and the patriarchs before. Yes, absolutely. God has appeared to Moses in the burning bush. Yes, absolutely. God has spoken to Aaron in the desert. Yes, absolutely. But for the people of Israel, this is going to be their first encounter with God. And it's in the context of redemption. It's in the context of miracles and salvation. And it's in the context of struggles. They've had to fight against Amalek. And they've had to go out and gather food, manna. So there's a context of provision, although just enough, not more, not less, etc. And so revelation is in all of these contexts. So in Exodus 19, verses 1 and 2, we read, "In the third month, after the children of Israel have gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day, whatever that day is, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they departed from Rephidim, and they came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. In the third month, this is where your time, this is the only time element that we get in the story. So you've had 2 months, and each of those months is in Hebrew is 28 days long. So you've got 46 days already, and then you've got it just says in the third month, so sometime in the third month. It doesn't say exactly 50 days. All you know is it's more than 46. And then you reach Mount Sinai, and God comes and speaks. And so it is a tradition that the word on that day in verse 1 is day 50. That this is or day 49/50, going over into 50. That this is Pentecost. And it stuck with us ever since. And there is no reason why you would even contemplate arguing against this tradition. It would do us no great favor. And what is this festival about? Well, revelation. What is one of the greatest revelations that God does? Well, he reveals himself. So God speaks to the people at Mount Sinai for the very first time. For the very first time they hear his voice. They've been crying out to him in Egypt when they don't know anything about him. They don't know who he is. They haven't heard his voice. They haven't heard any prophecies from him. They're crying out, Lord, please save us. God of Abraham, we don't know who you are. We know Abraham had a God, and we know that you're real. We know that you're the creator. Save us. And then he did. And so now they're, at Mount Sinai, perhaps a little fearful, perhaps filled with excitement and anticipation. Something is going to happen. And in verse 3, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Come up," right? And this is the idea that God is now going to speak the 10 Commandments. He is going to write down the laws on 2 tablets, front and back. He's going to give them to Moses, and the Torah, which is the guidance and the instruction of God, is going to instruct the people on how to really engage in all aspects of human flourishing. God is going to instruct his people on how you have proper worship, how you negotiate relationships between other nations, with women, with Gentiles, how you take care of the land, how you take care of slaves and servants, how you take care of the poor, tithe. You name a facet of society, God's going to address it in his word, in his what we would call the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And the 10 Commandments starts with Ani Adonai Elohecha. Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am the Lord your God. And those are the very first words that the people of Israel hear. And the tradition is that the people of Israel hear the voice of God, and it is so ecstatic, they're so excited by what they're hearing, that their hearts are just about to burst and explode within them, that they actually tell Moses, which they do say in the Bible, in the text, you go up and talk, we can't bear it. And so they hear the voice of God for the very first time, and they're so excited. They're looking forward to receiving the Torah, which is the festival that's what we're commemorating. We're commemorating the receiving of the law, and that's where all this tradition comes from. It's pure tradition. Okay, the timing, which you pick up in Exodus, there's 49 days. You're counting a thing, a piece of wheat called an Omer, which is essentially a weight of wheat, not very much. And then once you've actually done the counting, it just says, do Pentecost. So what do we do? Well, today it involves staying up late and studying. Now, why do you stay up late? I hear you ask. Well, it's because the tradition is that Israel stayed up all night listening to the voice of God, listening to God speak to Moses and having Moses come down and relay the words of God to them, and them sort of wanting to hear. There's also the tradition that actually Israel fell asleep and missed the Torah. Isn't that horrible? And so therefore they completely missed the commandment that you shouldn't make idols, and they made an idol and it was all terrible. Okay, so they don't want to miss the words of God this time. So they'll stay up all night and read the Bible. Great. There's lots of different traditions. The traditional book that you read at this time is the book of Ruth. And so in the Jewish lectionary cycle, so for those that are following us on Torah Plus, we're reading and studying the Jewish lectionary cycle called the Parashat Shavuot, the portion of the week, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. But other books are added, and so every week you would also read a haftarah, a portion of the sacred histories like Kings or Chronicles or the Prophets, and so there's a few extra books to read. But during the calendar cycle, each festival gets a book to read. So at Sukkot, you read Ecclesiastes. At Hanukkah, obviously Maccabees. At Passover, it's the Song of Songs. On Rosh Hashanah, it's portions of Genesis. On the 9th of Av, you read the Book of Lamentations, etc. For this festival, Purim, you read Esther. For this festival, you read Ruth, even though the book of Ruth is actually about a barley harvest, which is Passover. So now Passover and Pentecost are actually linked together. There's no way you actually separate them, because Passover is about redemption. It's great to be redeemed. Redeemed to what? And so what is Pentecost about? It's about a people becoming a nation. It's about people receiving God and understanding who He is for the very first time. It's about people receiving the Torah and understanding what their obligations are back to this God. What does He expect us to do? How does He want us to live? How does He want us to flourish? What plans has He got for us in the future? So you have to have them both. And so it's quite interesting that the book of Ruth, which is heavily messianic, is it not, is actually a barley harvest, which is Passover, and it's read at Pentecost, which is a wheat harvest. Okay. That probably was about as clear as mud, right? But, that's Jewish tradition for you, okay? No need to overthink it. Lots to ponder. But the one of the traditions which we also see in the New Testament is this idea that Paul is writing to the people. He mentions it in Corinthians. It's in the Epistle of Peter, and it's in whoever writes Hebrews. Many people think it's Paul. I'm not convinced. That we should move from milk to solid foods or meat, and there's always a food element that's attached to a biblical festival. So at Hanukkah, eat donuts. At Passover, eat lamb. Okay. On Rosh Hashanah, you eat apples and honey, and for Shavuot, there's this idea of eating cheesecake, of eating milk, some sort of milky product. Although, as Paul says, milk is not where you're supposed to stay. You're supposed to move on to something a lot more solid. But what does the Torah, this thing that we're receiving about about receiving from God, what does it say about milk? Well, there's this interesting commandment which you find in Leviticus, right? Actually, you find it in a bunch of areas. Actually, you see it in Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 14. This idea of don't cook meat or don't cook a goat, in its mother's milk. So when Paul writes about you've been having milk, but you really should go into solid food or sort of meat products, that's a kosher thought. You know, if you're Jewish and you're hearing this idea of go from milk to meat, you're thinking kosher. You're thinking dietary law, and yet here we have a festival which is about milk. Yet we're told in the Torah, don't cook meat in its mother's milk. Although if we're actually honest, and we have a look at what the actual text says, Exodus 34, what's the text? Exodus 34:26 and Deuteronomy 14:21 and Exodus 23:19. So there's 3 times that the Bible says don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. It just says don't cook goat in its mother's milk. It doesn't say don't cook anything else in its mother's milk. It even doesn't even say don't eat it, right? The literal text doesn't have anything to do with actually eating the thing that is cooked in milk. All of that is tradition. And so the rabbis, and here I'm talking about rabbis of the 2nd, 3rd century, so a couple hundred years after Jesus, are looking at the Bible and they notice that the biblical text literally only forbids cooking a mixture of milk and meat together. And it doesn't say anything about actually consuming it or what you can do with it, whether you can sell it to a Gentile. It doesn't say. But they do notice that it says it 3 times. So it's obviously super important, even though it's not clear, just like Shavuot. It's important, but it's unclear exactly what you're supposed to do. So tradition, you need a little bit of help. So what they do is they say, well, if it's mentioned 3 times, it must have 3 levels of distinction. There must be 3 things that we're not supposed to do. So they'll say, don't cook meat and milk together, even if it's not eaten or not. That's irrelevant. The text says don't do it, so don't do it. Don't eat milk and meat together. So regardless of whether you cook it or not is irrelevant. Don't you consume it. So for example, the text says don't cook it. Well, if I didn't cook milk and meat, can I still eat it? And their conclusion is, well, no, you can't. And the other one is don't benefit from it in any way. So don't try and make money from it. Don't start a shop, a restaurant and sell it. You know, don't sell it to a Gentile. They just say stay away. Keep milk and meat separate. And this is what Paul picks up on in the New Testament, where he says you need to move on. You can't stay just with milk. You can't stay with just the light fluff of just, yeah, okay, I'm saved, I'm redeemed, and that's it. It's great. It's fantastic, but you've got to move into a deep relationship with God. You've got to get deeper into the Bible. And that's what you see in the New Testament, and that's the tradition that's coming out from the Jewish people as they go, we're redeemed from Passover. We go through a variety of struggles after 49 days and we get to Mount Sinai. And then when we're expectant, nervous, confused, all of the above and a whole lot more, God comes down and he speaks. He says, I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. I've brought you to this place. Here's what I like and here's what I don't like. Here's how I expect you to behave and here are your obligations to me. This is what I'm going to do for you and how I'm going to bless you and take you into the future and how you're going to be a light to the nations. I'll move you from milk, which is the miracles of Passover. It's great to see miracles. It's absolutely fantastic to see the water parted and for you to walk through on dry ground. It's incredible that every single day you get to go out and there's food on the ground just for you. And you get to collect it and eat it and have the presence of God in your midst. It's great. But they're not the things that save you and or deepen your relationship. That's just the milk. What's the meat? What's the solid food? Hearing the voice of heaven, getting into a relationship with God, understanding what he wants you to do and how he wants you to flourish and how he wants to be within your presence, but he wants a presence that's growing. He wants to live in a community that's flourishing, that's expanding. When you get into the New Testament and Jesus is speaking about the kingdom of heaven is always expanding. It's always dynamic. It's always moving forward. It's always bringing in more people into the flock and into the kingdom. The kingdom is growing like the fisherman catches all types of fish, lots and lots of different types, all of that. And so there is this idea that when we're studying and reading the Bible and we're coming up to journeying through faith, you need your Mount Sinai experience. You need to have your Shavuot. You need to have your Pentecost. You need to get deeper into the Word of God. You need to hear His voice and put it into practice. And so let's have a look at going from milk to meat. That is, not being superficial, getting in deep, knowing that life, the Christian walk is more than miracles, though they're great. My gosh, they're fantastic, and you should be expecting to see miracles in the kingdom of heaven. But you need the voice of God. You need to put faith into action, or you need to do the truth. Okay, and so let's have a look at the book of Ruth, which is the book that we're meant to read this section, this holiday. And as we go into the book of Ruth, I'm just going to start at the beginning. Why not? The Ruth in Hebrew is not a Hebrew name. Okay, it's the name of a Moabite, and it doesn't have a meaning in Hebrew. It has a meaning in Moabite. It means companion. Okay, it means your companion, your close one. It says in chapter 1 of the book of Ruth that it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. So we understand that we're now in the time of what's called the Shoftim, in the time of the judges, that there was a famine in the land. So in the ancient world, you don't read the Bible. Why not? Because you didn't have one. In the ancient world, and at the time of Jesus, you didn't have your own personal copy of the Bible. The Bible was a community book. Communities owned the scrolls. They were incredibly important. They were well guarded, and they were kept in what was called an aron, an ark, a box. And protected from damage or from danger, etc. And the community heard the scriptures read. Jesus happened to be a reader. He goes into a synagogue and he reads from the scroll. Not everybody, and people would have heard him. And so faith comes by hearing. So what you hear sets off questions. What you hear sets off your journey through the scriptures. What you hear makes you think, oh, I need to delve deeper into this, or it pings something in your brain or in the community for you to ask a question. So in the days of the judges, there was a famine. When you hear of a famine, what do you think of? Famines happen when you're doing something wrong. In the Torah, one of the ways that God disciplines his people is he withholds rain, right? If in Deuteronomy it says in chapter 11, I think, it describes that if you obey these commandments, then God will send rain. But if you don't obey these commandments, then God will withhold rain. And if you don't have rain, you don't have crops. If you don't have crops, you don't have food. You have therefore a famine. So when you hear, when the book of Ruth starts and it says there was a famine, you immediately know something's wrong. The people of Israel at the time of the judges are not doing well. When you read the book of Judges, their history is like up and down. Sometimes they have a good judge and they do well, and then they do poorly and they get overtaken by one of their enemies. They need another judge and he's to free them, and then they do well, etc., etc. So quite a seesaw. So we're at a time when we're not doing well, and so God has withheld rain, and there's a famine. And we hear of a certain man from Bethlehem, the house of bread, Beit Lechem, which is an interesting thing to hear because you're at a time of famine and he comes from the house of bread. Okay, so we've got this nice little juxtaposition going on. And his name, he flees to the country of Moab because of the famine. Moab, when you hear the word Moab, you think, oh my gosh, why are we going there? They're our enemies, even though they're actually related to us. Okay, they're the descendants of Lot, who was the nephew of Abraham, so it's part of the family. However, we all know of the problem that Lot had after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that there was an incestuous relationship with his daughters, and you create Moab. You also create Ammon, which happens to be the capital of modern-day Jordan, Amman. But Moab is not it doesn't have a good mental picture of history when you're thinking biblically. They often opposed the people of God. They forbade them from entering their territory when they were coming into the land of Canaan. They offered no support whatsoever, and they even engaged in trying to trick Israel using the king of Midian and the prophet of Balaam. So it's all negative. Why are we going there? But he travels with his wife and his sons, and then we get their names eventually in verse 2. The name of the man was Elimelech. Well, it's actually a pretty good name. Eli, my God, Melech, king. My God is king. It's a good, strong name. True name. Good name. Anybody who names their kid Elimelech, well done. Okay? And the name of his wife, Naomi, which means delightful to me or pleasant to me. Beautiful name. Great name for somebody. Okay. Now they have 2 sons, and their names are Machlon and Chilion. And these are terrible names. Okay? They literally mean sickness. I mean, who names their kid sickness? This is my kid, disease and sickness. What was going on in life? You figure it out. Okay? Something was really poor at the time period when these kids were being born, that they get these disastrous names. Not that it really helps them either, by the way. And then when they go into exile, galut, when they leave Israel, no one tells them to leave, by the way. Right? It doesn't say, and the Lord God told them in a dream, Elimelech, leave Beit Lechem, leave the house of bread, and flee. He does. So he's not. There's no hint here that he's actually being obedient to God, in any stretch of the imagination. So he dies, the sons die, and all that's left is Naomi is left with 2 daughters-in-law who happen to be Moabites. Now, all through, there's 4 chapters in the book of Ruth. All through the book of Ruth, she's continually called Ruth the Moabite, even though the tradition is that she converts. And in Jewish tradition, if you convert, then you are no longer to be reminded of who you were previously. This is, when it is though the old man has died and the new man has been born. The sort of imagery and the language that we pick up in the New Testament. But here in the actual text, then she's always got her old name. It's as though they're not actually ashamed to be reminding people, do you know who she is? Okay? Do you know that she came from this people group that were our enemies, that were not friends, even though they are distant cousins and probably really should be bonding to us. They're not, and so there's this tension in the story. Like, we want her to be fully one of us, yet at the same time the text is always saying, remember where she's come from, remember how far she's moved, and think about what this can be for anybody that we meet. There's no one that's beyond the reach of grace. There's no one beyond the reach of mercy. There's no one that's actually unredeemable, except, as Jesus says, the son of perdition. That's about it, right? Just that guy. There's no unforgivable sin except the one unforgivable sin, and you haven't done it. And so there's no one can anyone know and fathom the deepness and greatness of the mercy of God. Probably not. Or the heights of how much he wants to bless us. Probably not. But the text here has this lady, and she binds herself to the commonwealth of Israel. You know, these famous lines, I go where you go, your people are my people, and where you die, I'll die. Right? You know, that sort of, tough, strong commitment that Ruth gives her mother-in-law, and then who ends up becoming the grandmother of the Messiah, of David, the house of the Messiah. So it's an incredible part of the story. So initially, we end up with good names that become bad names, and then as you go through the story, they become good names again. The character that we are introduced when the ladies return to the land of Israel, the famine is over, so we're probably doing well again. Okay, we've got ourselves a good judge. People are starting to obey the mitzvot, the commandments, the Torah again, and we encounter this man Boaz, and so he hasn't left Bethlehem, unlike Elimelech, who left. He didn't. He's still farming away in Bethlehem, and so he's been able to survive the famine apparently, and is now growing quite healthily a good crop. And his name Boaz, in him is strength. So his dad gave him a great name. Okay, good strong name. You know the story. You know the encounter. Boaz and Ruth bond, and Naomi sets up the evening encounter that's going to cement the relationship. That Boaz is going to act like a Goel. He's going to act like a redeemer, the kinsman redeemer, and then they will get married and produce the Messiah. But basically, the family of Naomi and Ruth will be bound to the household of Boaz. He will protect them, he will support them, and he will buy back all their territory and farmland that they'd lost when they had left Bethlehem and gone to Moab and sort of lost everything. But along the way, we often pick up as believers in Yeshua, as believers in Jesus, we often see a very strong messianic sign in here, and there is. But we often see Boaz as the Jesus figure, right? He's Jesus, and Ruth is the Gentile bride, the church, and marrying together, and isn't it all wonderful? And that's great, and why not? However, if you literally read the text, Boaz has to say something. It says in in chapter 3, in verse 11, Boaz is calming Ruth down. He says, "My daughter, don't fear. I will do all that you request, for all the people in my town know that you are a virtuous woman." Ruth is a model of what a good lady is. Okay, when you think of King Solomon, and he writes about in Proverbs 31, who is the wife of noble character. Okay, the image that he's got is his great grandmother, right? Is this character Ruth, and but it says in verse 12 of chapter 3. Now it is true that I am a close relative, okay, and the Hebrew is Goel Karov, Redeemer close. However, there's someone closer. And you go, we don't know his name. We never get to know this guy's name. He's the unnamed closer relative than Boaz. So we often like to say, but Boaz is the Jesus figure, but then there's someone closer than him. So this is where the typology falls down, is that he can't be the Jesus figure in the way we might want him to, because there's another person who should be doing his job, which, by the way, isn't. Right? Whoever this unnamed person is, they're not doing their job as the Redeemer. And maybe this also gives a little excuse to Boaz why he didn't initially redeem Naomi as soon as she returned back, right? Because you got to remember that should have been the tradition. That is the Levitical injunction, is that she comes back, she's a widow, she's got a daughter-in-law, they're both widows. The Redeemer, the kinsman Redeemer, he has a job. He has a job to go and protect them, to buy back their territory, to find husbands for them, and prolong life and flourish. But he doesn't. He has, Naomi has to set up the little midnight encounter. Maybe it's because Boaz thought that this other guy would do it, but he doesn't, and so you end up with the incident where he waits at the gate, and he buys back by the swapping of a shoe, and he convinces the other unnamed Redeemer to allow Boaz to do his job. And so the story that we read at Pentecost, the story of redemption, of buying back that which was lost, where things had gone poorly, we weren't being very obedient, to being obedient, and the famine coming back with now a flourishing harvest. We're celebrating, Book of Ruth is celebrating the barley harvest. So this is actually Passover, and the tradition in the Jewish people, remember, is that when does the Messiah come? Comes the Passover, right? The Passover is one of the great messianic festivals. It's at Passover that you set the cup for Elijah. It's at Passover you go and check the door to see if Elijah's actually coming, the herald of the Redeemer. It's Passover that is the story of the lamb and the blood of the lamb and saving us from death, etc., etc., etc. And so, but the connection between Passover and Pentecost is linked in the story here by the Book of Ruth. That and it's a story full of expectation, confusion. Why aren't people doing what they're supposed to be doing? And yet there is the blessing that finds fulfillment in the Redeemer does his job, and you get to the end where people are in a family. They're bonded. They're grafted in to the household of Israel. They're grafted into the house of David. And this Gentile woman who has boldly proclaimed her loyalty and love for God and for the Jewish people, she ends up becoming part of the redemptive messianic plan. And so for us, as Gentiles, as the bride of the Messiah, grafted into the household of Israel, we can experience these things on a new and deeper level this Shavuot, this Pentecost. We can in all of the anticipation and expectation, as well as any confusion or things like that, or struggles that we might have had getting to this point, then we can say, your God is my God, your people are my people, and I go where you go. And I will gladly and willingly become part of the redemptive plan. The Messiah will give his protection and his grace and his covering towards us, and we will be able to, to flourish and see fruitfulness. We'll be able to see life spring up afresh, not only in family life, but also in community life that spills over into what we would like to be our nations. And so there's so much there that comes into this festival. But let's now pause and just contemplate a little bit of some of the things that we've looked at. What have we looked at? It's Shavuot. It's the Feast of Weeks. The biblical text doesn't give us a lot of information about this holiday. This holiday is built largely upon tradition. Tradition is not an evil thing. It can be a very helpful thing, as long as we all understand that what we're doing is we're just digging deeper into the text. We're digging deep, looking for the wells of wisdom that God can give us. We're trying to move away from milk and just being addicted to only living and dwelling in miracles. Miracles are great. You should have them in your life. But they're not the thing that saves you. Okay? You need solid food. So this is what Paul says in Galatians. This is what Peter says in his epistle. This is what the writer of Hebrews says in his letter to the Hebrews. Don't stay with milk. Move on to deeper things. And we should always acknowledge that the festivals of Passover and Pentecost are linked together. They're linked together by the idea of counting an Omer, of this idea that something starts, and then as you count, it's heading towards something. Passover leads to Mount Sinai. Passover leads to Pentecost. Passover leads to the giving of revelation, where God reveals himself to us, perhaps even for the first time. Each of us actually has our own personal Mount Sinai experience. Each of us could probably share with each other. Even tonight, we could share our own personal testimonies of how God redeemed us. That was our Passover event. God saved me from XYZ. And it would all be true, and it would all be a great witness, and it would be a fantastic encouragement. But after getting saved, we would also be able to tell each other about how God revealed himself. How long did it take? How did he open up the scriptures to us? How did he reveal his will, etc.? And those are the sort of themes that pop out or are contemplated this Shavuot. As we're learning about how God is revealing himself, we become part of the plan. It is as though we are joining with the house of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah, receiving the wisdom from heaven. Who came out of Egypt? Well, it wasn't just a group of Hebrew slaves. As we know from the text itself, it says that there was a mixed multitude, that Gentiles came out of Egypt with the Jewish people. It was Jews and Gentiles that went through the Red Sea and the miracle of the parting of the water. It was Jews and Gentiles who were nervous and afraid when the Amalekites came out to do battle and they had to go and fight with Joshua. It was Jews and Gentiles that had the presence of God as a pillar of cloud of fire, fire by night, cloud by day, guide and move the people of Israel towards Mount Sinai. It was Jews and Gentiles who went out every morning and looked for manna. He was feeding and sustaining everybody. So Jews and Gentiles are meant to be together, and so we can learn so much from this festival as well. And I personally like cheesecake, but you don't dwell just on cheesecake. That's just the milk, the fluff, that leads us on to something deeper. And what's really the meat and potatoes of our faith? It's understanding the will of God through the Torah for our lives, that by the power of the Spirit we put into practice, right? It's doers of the truth that come to the light. That's John 3:21. And or one of my favorite scary passages from Luke. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? You study the Word of God to find out what He's like, to find out who He is, to find out what He wants us to do, and then you put it into practice, and then there'll be all kinds of human flourishing. So, friends, I hope that you have a really good Shavuot. I hope that Pentecost is a great blessing to you and your communities and your families. I hope Pentecost seals, right, the redemption that we began at Passover, and opens up by the power of the Spirit new life, new thoughts, new depth from the Bible and from the Word of God and from the Spirit of God. Amen.